Okay, today I want to get into Unit 4. If you want to follow along or try to follow along, there is a Unit 4 2015, no, Unit 3 2015 file on OneDrive under Unit 4. We're basically picking up where we left off in Unit 3. So that's the starter. If you got your Unit 3, you can use that. I will be saving mine as Unit 4, so we can keep them separate if you need to for some reason. What we're going to be talking about in this unit is functions. And at this stage of your programming careers, you all have a pretty good handle on what functions are for. They let us split up our code, reuse some code, mostly to split it up in this case because we've got so many things that these websites are going to be doing. We want to split the processing up. Most of the processing we're splitting is what would be considered a method. Now I got to give Adam a little credit, even though he's not here. He's found that classes do exist, and they do in PHP. Murak doesn't use a class to implement this, and I understand why, because there's very little data involved. Generally, a class, you build members and methods and constructors and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Really, what we need for the classes here are the methods. The data that's coming out of a database gets thrown into an array, just about always gets thrown into an array. So a lot of the functionality of a class is really not used here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to do it Murak's way. If you want to play with classes like Adam did, you're welcome to. I'm going to use Murak's technique of just having libraries of methods. So instead of having classes, I'm going to have a library of methods. That way I don't need constructors. I don't need data members, though there might not be any. It simplifies things just a smidge. We don't, particularly the constructor part. And it also simplifies communicating with these methods. We just call them by name instead of having to instantiate an object first and then calling the method. If we use functions, we just call them by name. So I'm going to be using all functions. You can put them anywhere, but we're going to put them in a library. So if for some reason you have a page that needs a little bit of PHP on it that isn't in a model someplace, which is pretty rare. I mean, if we're following an MVC model, you're not going to have a view with any PHP in it anyways, other than output. But if you need to, you can include PHP functions anywhere on an HTML page, including below the end HTML tag, and it'll still see them and process them. Unlike the regular PHP that we've seen that's all global, these functions just sit there. Nothing happens to those functions until somebody calls them. It's like any other function. So it doesn't matter where you put them. You could bury a function right in the middle of this case here. And as long as it's never called, it won't do anything. PHP recognizes a function as a function, doesn't do anything with it until you call it. Most of ours, if not all of them, are going to be inside of a library. Last time we already created a weights library, or actually, yeah, a weights library, if you will. It will become a library of functions today, so if you wish, you can open that up. And all we did is transferred all this code into there. Instead of having it on the results page, we transferred it here and then included it in our cases. What we're going to do today is turn all of these into functions. If it's a simple calculation, you might not need functions altogether, but most calculations for us are going to be done inside of a function. All of our database access is going to be done inside a function. You need to get some data. You write the SQL and execute the commands, generate an array of data inside of a function, send it back. You need to save. You send the data in, save it in a function, write the SQL to update the database, and go. So everything's done inside of functions. In this case, and in your Unit 4, we're going to do some conversion. Typically, I don't write all this stuff out this way and then convert it to functions. I'm building functions right away. If it's a PHP function, still has to be inside a PHP tag, so most of our model files are going to look like this. And I've got a lot of big important notes. This showed up in Unit 3. I just discovered today it shows up twice here in these notes. That tells you how much of a pain it was for me to have to try to discover this. But if you have a blank line like this line 19 here, at the bottom of a model file, at the bottom of a view file even, it'll cause trouble when you upload this. At least it did for me when I uploaded to Fat Cow. couple of years ago. For all I know, it's better now. Maybe it was an issue with FatCow, maybe it was an issue with that version of PHP, but these blank lines cause trouble if you're uploading to a Linux server at the very least. Because that's what FatCow is for me. So my advice is just take those out. If you leave them in here, localhost is going to work fine, your testing is going to work fine, but if you decide to put these up on a server someplace, you're going to cause trouble. But since all we're using is localhost, I'm not going to be looking for them, taking points off, etc. So our models, our libraries, only contain functions. I don't put any HTML in there. I do have PHP that creates HTML inside of functions, but that's different. You don't see any HTML here. And you shouldn't see too much raw PHP, meaning not inside of a function. You can declare variables globally. And when you declare them globally, we'll see in a little while here, the functions have access to them. In our cases page, I'm going to switch gears here quickly. I'm going to go to the cases page, and what I did is included the weights here because that's where I needed the functions. In the future, this entire cases file, every case is going to refer to some function inside this library. So instead of including it here, getting used to brackets. Can't select a line. Wasn't there an include file? I got to talk to Justin. Okay. Take that out, and I want to put it up here, but instead of I don't want to do that. Instead of an include file, I'm now going to use a require statement. Somewhat interchangeable, though I start getting errors here, and I'll have to figure out why. Somewhat interchangeable, but a require, I use it for libraries. I require these methods, basically is what I'm saying. I'm going to use them. Versus an include statement that says I require this code, plug it in here. Subtle difference. I use them, distinguish them that way, and that's the only reason I do that. So I'm going to do a require statement. And now this is where you're likely to make a mistake. I need the weights PHP file. With your HTML experience, you might say, well, they're in the same folder, so all I really have to say here is that I require weights.php. If you do that, it'll say I can't find it. Because remember, this code is being included into the controller, the index file. And so when this require statement executes, it will already be inside the index file, so you always have to provide that path here. There is no, it's in the same folder with me. The only file that would be in the same folder with itself is the index file, and there are no other files with the index file. So you're always going to be designating the folder name, but never any dots. The only reason you'd go more is if you had sublevels, okay, subfolders, which are perfectly legal. So now I'm saying I require the weights PHP file from models. Then this should give me variables that are accessible by these. But what I discovered is when I made this change, took it out down here, that this didn't work for some reason. And I'm thinking it's because these are functions versus code. That's my guess. Let's see if we have the same effect here. So I'm going to save everything here. Switch back over here. Remember, to run any of this, you have to have XAMPP running. And now that I think of it, I don't think I do. I've created a folder on my desktop. I'm running in Mac. In your case, I would create a folder that's got a link to your favorite notepad editor and text editor, a link to XAMPP all in one place, and a link to htdocs so that you can get to it quickly. Unfortunately, whenever I run XAMPP, I have to have administrator rights, so running it for you under XAMPP, under a Mac, may not be such a bright idea. We get the Apache server started. And this is what I mean, but remember, your folder also needs to be in the htdocs folder. can't just put it anywhere anymore. If you want the server to see it, the web server, the Apache server to see it, you need to put it in here. And the only way your PHP is going to execute is if it's running on an Apache server.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to play catch up because my.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've just been trying to play catch up because my machine wasn't loading. Is the only thing you changed so far is
the only thing I've changed is that. Yeah, I looked around in the weights file and everything's in there. Okay, so here's what was in there. But I think I'm going to run into trouble with these. It does. Okay, so we're going to get some errors when we load that page. Remember to load the page. I like to go to localhost, and by the way, notice I've also switched to Chrome. Anybody want to tell me why?
Yeah, because our system's implementation project's going to be based on
Our Lions project is all Chrome. They say they use Chrome. So I'm trying to get used to Chrome, and so far everything's working pretty well. The only thing I've discovered is I have a lot of zip files on my OneDrive account, and I get a lot of emails with zip files. And if I'm using Chrome, it doesn't allow me to immediately send those to WinRAR and unzip them immediately. I have to actually save them first and then unzip them. And I'm getting real used to the other way, so I might have to play with Firefox on the side a little bit.
that WinRAR doesn't have
A tie into Chrome, probably. I might have to reinstall it. But anyways, here's my folder. Click. And there's the errors. It says it can't find these variables.
that's because we haven't made functions yet.
Pardon me?
We haven't made functions.
We haven't made functions yet, but what's interesting, we said that require statements and include statements are pretty much the same. Guess not, huh?
Require will not continue, right? I think we talked about that.
The require won't continue? What do you mean?
Require will stop the PHP from running afterward. If it's not there, it stops it. It throws an error and stops.
If it's not there, but why wouldn't it be there? Because in my index view, I said, give me the cases, and inside the cases, I say, give me that.
Firefox runs just fine.
Firefox is fine.
No errors. It is weird.
That's bizarre.
I'm getting the same error in Firefox.
Okay. You must not have deleted the line that was inside the case. If you just added the require statement, the include statement is still there and it's bringing those in. But on weights PHP line 5, it can't find the item weight pound variable. Okay, so line 5, right? PHP weights. Line 5, right here, item weight pound. Why can't it find it? Because there's nothing to extract. So all of this is getting plugged in and it's trying to do the math. So it's executing the PHP, even though I'm just bringing it into the index file and I'm just bringing in the page that collects the data. But because of the way this is set up right now, because of the way this is set up, there's nothing in the request array. And all of this code is being compiled because I moved it. Now remember before, it was sitting in here and it was sitting right here. And the only way that it tried to bring in that code is if we were moving to the weight results page. Now with functions, that's going to be okay. So once we get done, those errors will start creeping away. So the reason this is doing this is not because require commands and include files are different. If I made this include, I'd still get the errors. Because it's trying to do the same thing. Bring that code in, extract and do calculations with variables that don't exist yet because we haven't sent these. It's because I moved them. Okay. Well, shouldn't I then just include the require under here? No. Because in the future, the weights edit is going to need some required stuff too, because it's going to need lookup values for combo boxes, and the save, and the edit, and the list. They're all going to need it. So this is where they belong. This is where it belongs, but what doesn't belong in here is raw code, and that's what we're going to remove. So that's why it's failing. Okay, so we brought it in. Now my little side notes here say, Create awaits PHP, we did that already. Add a requirement statement, remove it, note the errors, not because it's a required. Okay. One other note here, there is a require once. Can you see it okay, Reen? Okay. There is a require once statement. As your pages get bigger and bigger and bigger, you may accidentally require the same file twice. Sometimes it's because it's a cyclic thing. If you run into that problem, you'll get an error saying I already have functions with these names. Okay. And you'll get an error. And the way to solve that problem is to switch to require once. However, require once has its own overhead, because if you say require it once, then it has to check to make sure it hasn't been required before, or even if it hasn't been. And so Murak's advice, and I seem to agree, is just use require. When you run into problems because your website is so huge, maybe it's a naming issue, by the way. Why are you trying to require the same set of libraries twice? But if you run into issues, then maybe a require once is a quick fix. Then you got to figure out where. Probably everywhere you're trying to include that library, you should say require once. Or try to figure out why they're stepping on each other.
If two libraries have one function with the same name, you use require once, will they both have
You'll still get an error. Okay, his question for the recording is, what if I have two format functions called format in two different libraries? So one's for formatting dates and one's for formatting numbers or whatever we're formatting. Making this up as I go. Okay. If you try to require both of those at the same time, you will get an error because you have two functions called format. If you only require one, then you're okay, because every time we go back to the server, that we start fresh. So the fact that I used the last time I was looking at this page doesn't matter. As long as you don't try to require them both. But if you bring them both in, then you'll have a problem.
Yep. If you use the require once, though.
Require once is about the entire library. It goes here, okay, on the word require.
Yep.
So it brings the whole library in, or it doesn't. It checks to see if the library has already been brought in. So the one function inside, the require once will go, nope, I've never brought in that second library, and then it finds a second format function and throws an error.
Okay.
If you need to do something along that line, the solution might be namespaces. Create a namespace so that this is the date namespace and this is the number namespace, but then whenever you refer to the format function, you also have to refer to its namespace to keep them separate. So it's kind of like in SQL, when if the field names are different, no problem, but if you have two field names that are the same, then you have to qualify them to distinguish which one. I have not yet needed namespaces. If you want a little more information, there's a couple pages in the book. When we include model files, I don't use the word include, but it's so generic, right? All other languages allow you to include stuff. We were including core data the other day in the Swift class. It's a very common term. I prefer in PHP at least to use the require method to say that I need model files, and I use include for HTML and that kind of stuff. There's really not much difference. This is a little premature. In some cases, I talked about it previously, in some cases the controller, once it's done, needs to call another case. For instance, when I hit save, what do I want to do after the save? Generally, my solution is go back to the list. I've saved my changes. Think, again, iOS, because it's fresh in your mind. You go to the details page, you make some changes, you hit save. What do you want to happen next? You want to go back to the table view. Same kind of concept here on my website. So when I hit save, I want to go back to the list view. But I'm in the save option. I'm in the save case. I could duplicate all the code that's in the list case under the save case. I'm going to do the same thing when I delete. I'm going to do the same thing after I save new. And I'd have to make like 4 copies of the go back to the list view code. Easier way is to use the header command that says when I get to the bottom of my case, when I'm done saving and doing whatever I got to do to save my data, then call the same page with the customer list option instead. So the header command is used to jump from one case to the other, to execute another case from within this one, typically used for editing, save, delete, including save new. So that's where that comes in, typically for the saves. This one says save without any action, so it uses the default action. That's pretty rare. If I put that in there on a login system, I'm going to go back to the login after saving. Not likely. You're more likely to go back to the default page. There's that dot again. Send a question mark, action equals new action. I think we tried taking that dot out into the header command. It doesn't work very well, I think. The other thing that happens is you've all downloaded a new version of XAMPP within the last months or so, and PHP updates too all the time. So there may be new things in PHP that change. So if I tell you this is the law, you should know better by now. You've been in the Swift class. So this often follows a save or delete. The save and delete don't cause any output. They can. But if they don't, you can immediately jump to a different action. So here's buttons cancel. If the user clicked the cancel button, then just go back to the list book. On most of our pages, remember, we can have 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons. Here's button cancel, button delete, button trips. They're all submit buttons. They all basically submit the form and all the data comes with it. But if we hit cancel, I'm going to ignore all that data, and instead of processing the data, I'm going to say, never mind, go to the employee list instead. It's a lot easier than having 3 different buttons and 3 different forms. One that says go back but don't do anything. One that goes back says save this. And another one that says make some trips for this. So again, it allows you to jump around. I think it's a little premature. We'll hit it in a future unit here. There's the big important note again. No blank lines at the end. Finally, here's what a function looks like in PHP. I've already made the mistake of typing func because I was doing Swift all morning, and then I shifted gears to web data management. Now it's function. Pick a name. PHP functions that I've seen are camel case versus other languages where maybe they're title case. Really doesn't matter as long as you call it with the same case that you declared it. And then as many parameters as you want. Unlike other languages, you don't have to designate a parameter type because all variables are untyped. The only thing you might do is put an ampersand in front of these to pass by reference. We'll talk about that in a minute. Parameters are optional. Don't need to have any. You can have lots, and like JavaScript, if you have lots, there are ways to find out how many there are and work your way through them. However, unlike most languages, the return statement is optional unless your function returns something. If you hit the bottom of the function, it's going back. Doesn't matter. It's like me calling Justin and say, do your job, and then he hangs up on me. I'm figuring he's done. Okay. I like to be consistent. I throw a return statement on every one of my functions. But that's just me. It's not required. Unless your function does return a value, then obviously you have to return. Unlike other languages, you cannot overload a function in PHP. It goes back to what we were talking about before. How can I have 2 functions called format from 2 different libraries? It's still 2 functions. That may be one reason why Adam's decided he wants to use classes, because then there's no overlap, right? They're 2 different classes, and you have to put the class name or an instance name first. Then there's no confusion about which format we're talking about. Again, it's not something I've had a lot of trouble with. We haven't done much with arrays yet. We will. But what's unique, I think, about PHP is I can pass arrays to a function. When you pass an array to a function as a parameter, by default, it gets sent by value. In other words, a copy of the array is sent to the method or the function. That can be very wasteful depending on how big your array is, if you're passing it. So consider that. And if it is or could potentially be quite large, then consider passing it by reference, even if you're not going to change it, simply so that you pass a pointer to it instead of the entire array. We are running on a server. We would hope they have plenty of memory, but there's still no reason to waste it. The other thing that's kind of cool and this actually comes in quite handy, is a function can pass back, can return an array. Most languages you can't do that. You can't create an array and return it. Though Swift lets us do it, right? We've done all kinds of complicated, here's a collection, take it type stuff. But a lot of the older, is that the right term? I don't know. A lot of the other languages don't allow you to do that with arrays. With arrays, in most languages, you pass them by reference, which means when you say send this array to the function, you're not sending the array, you're sending a pointer to the beginning of it. And since you're already sending it by reference, there's no reason to return it because you're changing the original. That's how most languages deal with it. But what if you're writing a function like we will that collects data from the database? We generally take that data, convert it into an array, and send it back to whoever asked for it as an array. We didn't send anything in. We don't have to use pass by reference, force a pass by reference. We can just return it. Yeah.
I understand the memory thing and how pass by reference is going to save memory, but which is going to be faster? Is there going to be a difference?
Pass by reference.
I would guess pass by reference would be faster for the same reason. I'm sending one value, a pointer, the address of the beginning of my array, versus here's 150, 300, whatever values.
Anything else has to be copied before it can.
Yeah, and it has to reserve 300 sections of memory, however big that is, and then copy it. So I would say it's definitely faster to do pass by reference. If you're sending something in that you're going to manipulate and then sending it back out again.
So
Most of
if you're not manipulating it, then it's...
If you're not manipulating it, it's still, if you're sending an array in, it's definitely faster. How big is your array? I mean, if it's 100 things, how long is it going to take? Not very long. If it's 100,000, then think about it. But maybe the safe way is to say always pass arrays by reference. But most of our functions, most of what we're going to be doing with arrays inside of functions is the function creates the array. When we go out to a database in the next unit, the unit after that, when we go out to a database and say, give me a list of all the students in the web data management class and in these fields, what we get back is an array of arrays. It's already an array. That's what comes out of the database functions, is arrays. And so we simply return them to the controller, and the controller makes them available. Once they're outside there, the controller makes them available, and we can use them on the form. So don't worry too much about the pass by reference. I haven't used it a lot because I don't usually send an array and say, here, chew on this. I'm usually going out to the database.
What would be better if it wasn't an array? What if it's just a regular variable that you need to interact with? Is it
a regular variable? You don't save much. We're talking about one memory location, copy it. It's pass by value.
Is it theoretically more efficient to pass by reference in that case, or is there
Probably not, because when you pass the pointer, you have to pass a value, and you have to copy the pointer. So does it make a difference if I copy the pointer or I copy the age? 6 and 1/2 dozen the other. Maybe if it's strings, it'd be a smidge more efficient, but talking smidges. And these ampersands, here's the pass by reference. That gets really confusing. Can get really confusing. Okay, up here it says, let's do some functions. Let's write some functions. The first one I want to write is a function that calculates the total ounces. So I'm going to the weights file. And instead of doing this external, I'm going to create a function. So I'm just going to push all this stuff down. And my functions, I don't normally indent them because I don't see them getting inserted anywhere. Nobody ever sees them anyways. So I'm going to define a function, maybe, called calc total ounces. And I'm not going to send it anything. The design of functions, you might remember from other classes, is kind of up to you. How do you define these? Do they have stuff coming in? Do they not have stuff coming in? What do they send out? Etc. I do recommend you describe these. I used to think that some of you were kind of getting to the point where you don't want to do that anymore, but then every time I turn around, you start saying, well, if it's for you or if it's for somebody else, I should document it. And if you're doing it for me, then you should document it. Make it quick. Doesn't have to be a complete sentence. Given pounds and ounces and quantity, determine total ounces. Slash star, star slash. There's not a whole lot of collapsing going on here. I don't think if I move this down, will it let me? Oh, it does let me collapse. So this is a good idea to do it this way, just so you can collapse it. But you don't get to see the comments like we do in some of the others, unless I think we do that. Nope.
And in Notepad++.
Yeah, well, we're not using that
I
anymore. Are
think
we?
if you put the black comment up a line, bottom.
I did that.
You put the bottom one on the same line as total ounces.
Oh, so this way? Is that what you're suggesting? I still get this. Okay. So I would keep it about as tight as I can. And notice the only way I get the collapse button is if one of them is on a line by themselves. It could be that one, it could be the end one. I kind of like the end one myself. But that's just me, because that's the way I do it in C#, and now I can collapse this stuff and hide it if I need to. All right, now what do I want to do in here? I'm going to need every single one of my inputs, the pounds, the ounces, and the quantity. Since I need them all, I'm going to use the request array. Another thought that, I usually think about that. How much of the request array am I going to use? If the request array's got 10 variables and I need 5 of them, it's probably easier just to use the request array. Remember, it's super global. I don't have to declare it. I don't have to send it from function to function. It's available to everybody, period. In this case, I need them all, so there's not much question here. I'm going to use the request array right inside my function. Then I'm going to calculate these. I'm going to use these formulas to calculate my total ounces. And when I'm done, return it. Now there's not much to test here because these are all still going to cause trouble until I finish writing all of my functions, so let's write a few more. The next one that I want to calculate is just ounces from pounds. This one's going to have a parameter. So some of these I'm kind of making up, they're pretty small, but we'll do another one. Function convert pounds to ounces. I'm going to send in the pounds. Again, pretty simple. Some of you might be thinking, well, this is simple enough. Do you really need a description? But after a while, some functions have descriptions and some functions don't have descriptions. It gets kind of hard and tricky to figure out where they start and end. They tend to merge together a little bit, even when you collapse them. Well, that's interesting. What is this? Oh, because it's more than one line long. Weird. Okay, so what do I do in here? In this one, it's so simple. I'm simply going to return whatever the pounds are times 16, because that's how many ounces in a pound. I think you've seen it in a lot of languages. We did it in JavaScript, seen it in other places where if it's a simple formula, you simply include the formula in your return statement, send that value back to whoever asked for it, like this place. So instead of multiplying there, I'm going to say convert pounds to ounces, parentheses, dollar, and I erased it. What was it?
Item weight pound.
Item weight pounds. Is that shorter? No. But it demonstrates a function with a parameter, and it's not about shorter.
So does the request array, does that work with all functions even though it's only one?
Right now, this function doesn't need it because everything it needs gets sent to it. Would it work in there? Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry. No, let me rephrase that. The request array, yes, is available to every single function. However, I don't think that's what you were asking. I think what you might have been asking is if I extract the request array, is that available to all the other functions? And if that wasn't what you're asking, too bad, I'm answering it anyways. And the answer is no, not in this case. Because I extracted inside the function, only the function has access to the variables that are created by this. They're local variables. If I put it outside, everybody has access to it, but as you'll see in a little while, everybody has to explicitly state that I'm using all of those, so I don't usually do that. What I do is if I need the entire array, I extract it inside the function. If I have another function later that needs the entire array, I extract it. Again, doesn't take long to create those variables. But this function that I've written doesn't need the contents of the extract array. It needs to be sent the number of pounds that it wants to convert, that we want to convert to ounces.
So
And does that say consistent as one string so that if you extract it multiple times, you don't have multiple instances of it? So if one function modifies it and then another one modifies it, it's still the same string or same array
Which array are we talking about? Request?
request.
You don't modify the request array. That's the data that was sent to you from the form. Why would you want to modify it? I wouldn't modify it.
Okay, so technically for that top one, we just could have sent it, you know, the item weight pounds and the item weight ounces and the number of items individually.
We could have.
Okay.
Correct. From
So-
a reusability standpoint, maybe that's better because what if I don't have a request array, but I have to have those three pieces someplace? What if they're not in the request array and I want to call this? It might be better to reuse it that way. But you'll see a lot of the processing that we're doing when we use functions, and I'm setting you up for the database conversion of this, is we have functions that do things with the results of a query.
So if you put extract outside of the function, you
Mhm.
would just have to declare your variables as global inside the function to access those.
Every single function has to do that, yes.
Wouldn't that still be more efficient or not?
No. Efficiency is not what we're also looking for here in my systems class. We've been talking about, I already forgotten the term. It was chapter 1. We're all the way on chapter 3 now. Cohesion. How independent are modules of each other? And if you have a lot of global variables, the functions are too closely tied to each other. They're not as reusable. Right? This one we can make an argument for. It might go the other way, but I want to show you both. We do this quite a bit. That's why there's a global, super global array called request, because you need it all the time. Most programmers, seasoned programmers, would tell you stay away from global variables as much as you can.
Also, your item weight pounds is capital LBS.
Thank you. If I hadn't done that, I'd get the error like we saw before, saying I'd never heard of this variable, and then I'd have to go dig it out of the form to see what it really was.
I don't have an S in mind.
Oh yeah, sorry, no S.
No S. Which is pretty dumb. Who named that? Because it's multiple pounds, right? I would think. Oh well. Gotta go with it. So, there's a couple of examples of functions. Basic idea with parameters, without parameters. What if you want to return multiple values from one function? Then you got to go old school, as I call it, and use pass by reference. A function can only return a single value unless it's in an array, then it's different. But if it's not an array and I want to return age 1 and age 2, or I want to return total pounds and total ounces, both from one function, then I have to pass them by reference, which means whoever's calling already has to define these so that they have an address, and then I send the address in. On the receiving end, notice the ampersand. You've seen that briefly in Swift where we use the address of an error marker instead of the error marker itself. What we're doing here is saying you should expect a variable, but whatever it is, get its address, not its contents. And here's another one. Since we have its address, any changes we make to parm1 and parm2 are available outside of the function.
Can I make a comment?
Mm-hmm.
You should move pass by reference into your first semester classes because that's when the Skyward's questions.
Second semester. What's their question?
They want you to flop.
Oh, the switch function? Okay. I have to check. I got a funny feeling we talked about it, but we hardly ever use it. It's fairly rare. Especially today with objects. You want two things to come out, just create an object, you send the object out. But switch is one of those few that's left where you send something in and send two things in and switch them in place. It's another one of those questions that, never mind. Okay. Create calc weight results. Call total ounces. Calcs both the end pounds and the end ounces, and these are for demonstration purposes. I'm not saying this is the way I would necessarily do it, but just so you have an example in case you're applying for Skyward this summer, how to do pass by reference. And create another function that's called, what was it, something results, calc weight results, where I send it to parameters. No, I don't think so. I have to send it two parameters, otherwise I can't get anything out. First one is ampersand dollar. It's an ampersand, right? Yep. Ampersand dollar total ounces. What comes out? Really? Total ounces? Calcs both end pounds and end ounces. So end ounces and, oh, okay. And pounds. Now remember what I'm trying to display in the results is if you have 3 pounds, 15 ounces times 11 objects, what's your total weight in pounds and ounces? Okay, ounces here should never be bigger than, and maybe I want to flip that around just so it reads right, pounds and ounces. Final values. So we're going to need both of those values. And by the way, if you don't want to do these comments or they collapse, I don't care. Actually, I almost prefer you don't, because then you can read them. If they don't collapse, you can read them. So let's shift to that gear. Calc and return end pounds and ounces. So inside here it says I'm supposed to call my function for total ounces. So I'm going to create a variable called total ounces. And that's going to be equal to calc total ounces. I don't have to send it anything. Notice that this function doesn't really need the extract array because calc total ounces does most of that. Then, should have some existing code here that calculates the end pounds and the end ounces using total ounces. Since they already have those variables, I'm going to use them. paste those in here. Now, the only thing I have to be careful of is that I use the same names inside here as I use outside. And then the return statement is optional, right? Because I'm not returning anything except the stuff that's going out here. Can't return two values, so have a beer. That's how I know I've talked to you about it, because the PBR joke doesn't work in Programming Logic Intermediate either. So this function calls total ounces function, which calls the convert pounds to function. There's a nice chain of events here. How does the language keep that straight? They all do it. It's all automatic. You call a function, when it's done, it comes back. If you call somebody else, it's kind of got a placeholder. It's like me calling one person, and that person then puts me on hold, calls somebody else, and that person says, I'm done, I'm done, I'm done. Just causes this chain effect. All right. So in this case, we calculate those two values. And we probably need two PBRs, call from the cases file. But we also need to do our parameter for the delivery date. So let's see what else we got here. Here's the global variables. Scrolling a little too fast here. There we go. Any variable declared outside of a function is global, period. However, unlike most languages, if you're inside of a function, you have to designate explicitly that you're going to be using that variable. So if this variable is declared outside of a function, and my function wants to use it, in every other language I can think of, you just use it because it's global. Not in PHP. In PHP, those global variables are not available to a function unless you pass them in, or you use the global keywords that I'm using that global variable. Those are global variables. Remember, there's request and post and get that are super global variables. That's different. Yes, sir?
How is that actually working? Is that a pointer to the global variable itself, or is it somehow behind the scenes creating a new variable, letting you modify it inside function and then returning?
No clue. I don't care. Just my syntax rules. Right? So I'd have to look inside the compiler and see what it's really doing. And as many people have told me many times before, you're not smart enough to be a compiler programmer, so just let the compiler do its job. So I don't really know what's going on there. I'm guessing you're probably right that what that's doing is creating a pointer to that variable and letting us use it. That would be my guess, but there may be other things I don't know about that work behind the scenes, but this is what we have to do to get access to a global variable. We'll see a couple of instances of that. That's a good place for a break. When we come back, we'll talk about functions with optional parameters, ones that we don't necessarily have to provide, and we'll use that to our advantage to calculate our delivery date.